Hello beauties, how are you all doing? My name is Shaz, short for Shahrazad, and I love colorful makeup. Valentine's Day is approaching and I wanted to tell you all what are the Valentine's palettes that I have in my collection. If that sounds interesting, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you're not subscribed already and you're enjoying the content of my channel. And without further ado, let's jump into the video. Okay beauties, before I get started, I did this eye look with one of these palettes, and when I get to it, I will talk about it. There is no ranking in these palettes, it's just random ordering, and I tried not to repeat brands. I tried to pick one palette per brand, but there might be some repetitions, particularly with smaller palettes. I also tried not to use monotone palettes because, like, somebody could argue any monotone pink or red palette is a Valentine's palette. I mean, the first palette that I want to talk about that's going to set the stage of all Valentine's palettes for me is no other than Modern Renaissance. Friends, this palette was my introduction into becoming a makeup fanatic. And if this palette is not a Valentine's Day palette, I don't know what is. So what constitutes a Valentine's Day palette for me is the color story of the palette. And what I look for in the color story is one of two things. You're either gonna have the innocent, cutesy, love-themed Valentine, which would be a color story like this. You're usually gonna have some variation of red, some variation of pink, and going into nudes. Of course, the palette can be only red, only pink, a combination of red and pink, or it can honestly even be just nudes, like soft glam type palettes. And this palette provides me that kind of a look. And friends, let me also mention that this palette came out, I believe, in 2015 or 16. And for its time, it was very revolutionary. You did not see these kinds of reds in palettes, friends, back then, unless you shop indie brands, and the indie brand scene back then wasn't as big as it is today. So I remember it was so exciting for me to find reds in this palette that actually gave red payoff. Back then you would buy anything and it would honestly get dusty and muddy into a brown anyway. Didn't matter what it looked like in the pan. But this was one of those palettes that actually looked like this on your eyes, which was fantastic. And that is exactly why Modern Renaissance has such a special place in my heart. I absolutely love this palette, and I could not create this list without talking about this palette, and frankly talking about this palette first. Now, the second palette that I want to talk about brings out the other side of what I constitute a Valentine's palette, and the palette I want to talk about is Passion in Paris. Of course, when you're talking about passion, it has to be Valentine's, right? But look at how the color story is so different from Modern Renaissance. Here, you don't have that innocent theme of love. Here, you're going to get more of a vampy, sexy, sultry type of look. And that is what I consider the second type of Valentine's palette. And I absolutely love this palette, friends. I know recently BH restocked this palette along with some of its other palette from the travel collection, as well as their breakfast collection, and honestly, friends, I continue to tell people don't miss out on BH. Anyway, don't want to get off topic. Fantastic color story if you're trying to do those very sexy, smoky, but funky smoky. So with this, you can do purple smoky, you can do green smoky, you can do red smoky. So we're not just talking about those nude smokies, but very different type of a smoky look. And that is another thing that I consider very Valentine. I particularly love this color Tuileries, which is a garden in Paris. And the color is super unique. It's like one of those teals going into gray. And you can mix it with either this pewter color, you can mix it with this purple. Anyway, I can go on talking about this palette, but I can't do that in this video. So let's continue. The next palette that I want to talk about, friends, that gives you both the capability to do very soft kind of glam look for Valentine's Day, as well as very sultry, possibly smoky looks, is no other than this palette by Kaleidos. This is Futurism 3 Astro-Pink palette. And if you look at the color story, you know what I'm talking about. You have the nudes, but then you can combine some of these nudes with the pink and maybe a little bit of the red. But then you also have this black as well as this blue. And with different combinations of this palette, friends, you can make all kinds of variations of looks. Moving on to my next pick for Valentine's Day, and that is Dollhouse. I have time and time again called this palette a neutral with a twist, and honestly, this is one of those palettes that when I think about soft glam, I don't own soft glam palette from Anastasia of Beverly Hills because I'm just not a neutral gravitating person, in case you have not watched the rest of the videos in this channel, and this is the first one you're watching. So this is my go-to for soft glam, but then what I like about this palette is that it does give you the option to also go a little bit out of your comfort zone if you're a super neutral loving person and do a little bit of color, maybe with the pinks, maybe with some of these mauvey reds, maybe with the orange. I do have a full review of this palette with eye looks. If you're interested, I can tag it in the description box below. But if I wanted to make either a smoky look or just a neutral soft classic look for Valentine's Day, particularly if I wanted to make an all matte look, which is a very classic look for Valentine's Day, this would be one of the go-to palettes for me. The next palette is an oldie but a goodie, and that is Rose Gold Remastered by Huda Beauty. Now, I know that this palette is relatively old. Some of you might still have it in your collection. Last time I looked, which was, I want to say 2 months ago, you could still purchase this at Sephora. And if you look at the color story, you know why I put it in this list. I mean, you have your pinks, you have your nudes, you can do some color even in the nude range. And of course you have your black and your sort of taupey gray color if you want to just do very neutral smoky eye. And friends, I remember when this came out, there was a lot of hype around these shimmers. They're just super shimmery and metallic. Moving on to the next one in the list, friends. This palette is no longer available from this brand. Maybe the brand will bring it back in the future, and that is Thirst palette from Unearthly Cosmetics. It came out in their mystery box for Halloween. The reason I put it in this list is just look at the color story. I mean, maybe you could say this is Halloween, but to me, this is a lot more vampy Valentine's Day. I'm thinking to myself, if I want to make a vampy Valentine's look, I'm probably going to put some range of pink or orange in the crease, some range of dark red across the lid, maybe a little bit of an orangey red, corally, goldy color in my inner corner, and black in the outer V, and that is exactly the type of look you can get from this palette. So the names on the palette, though, friends, are very Halloween. Moving on to the next palette, friends. This palette, unfortunately, you can't really use on its own because it's all shimmer. I'm gonna have a few palettes like that, but the thing is that I realized that I'm a type of person who does not use all shimmer looks, but some of you might. So if you like doing one color looks, or if you're okay using multiple shimmers on your lids. So I did not want to exclude palettes just because they were all shimmer. And this palette is no other than the Dragonfruit palette from Clionadh. Now, the reason I consider this a Valentine's palette, honestly, friends, is if you take these two colors out, what do you get? Pretty much a variation of pinks. That's what you get. And although you all might see sort of an orange color here, this from different angles could look like it's pink orange. As I said, I'm not an all shimmer person, but for the person who does like to do all shimmer looks, you can definitely use these colors in your outer V and maybe some of these colors over the lid, and then the lighter colors in your inner corner, and rock a full shimmer, very pinky look. And that would look very much Valentine's to me. Also, friends, this color is just amazing. The Dragontini color, I don't know if you can see this. This is sort of a purple magenta pink going into green. Amazing color. The next palette is no other than the palette I used to make this eye look, friends, and that is Royal Rose from Cosmic Brushes. I feel like I don't really need to explain anymore why I consider a palette like this a Valentine's palette. If you remove these two colors, you're gonna kind of get a combination of pinks, purples, and neutral colors. You can definitely rock a lot of soft, neutral, classic looks that people usually wear on dates. Also, you can do this kind of a look, which is super pink and super Valentine. So definitely a Valentine's palette. Also, friends, today Cosmic Brushes came out with another palette. Unfortunately, I missed the launch by an hour. I miscalculated the time difference. Oh well, but you can be guaranteed I'm going to pick that palette up and review it for you. Stay tuned for that. And now that we're talking about soft glam nudie palettes, let's not forget this large one by Beauty. This is the Gentle Tease palette, and as obvious from the name, it's sort of designed for a very Valentine's type of looks. Everything from soft, nudie, classic, all the way to potentially smoky, and in between you have this variety of colors if you want to make very punchy, very loud coral or pink type of a look. Friends, I already mentioned there are some instances of multiple palettes from the same brand, just because I could not pick my favorite. And the first one I want to talk about from Colourpop is Strawberry Shake palette. This is one of my favorite 9 pounds friends from Colourpop. As I mentioned at the beginning, I tried not to pick any monotone palette. You could argue this is a monotone palette, but not to me. To me, the colors are pretty distinct. You have some colors that I consider more neutralish, and then you have these super bright colors of extremely bright neon pink in the center and the red at the top, and then you have coral and you have a pink. So to me, it's pretty varied, and I've definitely made very different types of looks with this palette. Anything from very office appropriate neutralish all the way to super bright look like this. So yeah, this is definitely a Valentine's palette for me. I don't think this palette is available anymore, but friends, obviously it's Colourpop, so they probably have a dupe of this right now in their collection. Before we continue to the next palette, I wanted to mention that if you wait until the end, you'll see that my last Valentine's Day palette is so different from all of these other palettes, but I still consider it a Valentine's Day palette. So if you're curious, stay till the end. And the next Colourpop palette I want to talk about, friends, I talked about in my last to buy or not to buy video, friends, and it made me bring out the palette and just remember how much I love this palette and how Valentine's-y it is, because I was talking about in that video that it looks like a few of the Valentine's releases. So I could not make this video without talking about it. And that is the Pretty Much palette, friends. Look at this color story. And not a monotone palette, friends. Not a monotone palette. You have this taupe color. You have reds, you have burgundy, you have pink, and then you have some golds and this sort of pearly color. This is an amazing 6-pan from Colourpop. Colourpop, I don't know what you're doing these days. Do more of these kinds of stuff. I don't know what changed with Colourpop in the past few years. I feel like Colourpop used to be a lot more exciting. Just my 2 cents. Moving on, friends, the next palette I want to talk about, unfortunately, is no longer available, and that is Love Notes from Beauty Bay. I mean, this was last year's Valentine's Day palette, friends. So obviously, it's going to be a very Valentine's-y palette. So you're going to have your very seductive and sultry purples, very soft pinks, and then nudes. You can do soft glam. You can do very pinky, you can do sort of lavendery purple, but it's all in the realm of very soft and sexy. I keep using the term soft glam, but honestly, I don't know what other term I can use instead of that, but that's sort of the type of look you can get out of this palette. Unfortunately, the palette is not available, but it has some very nice duochrome shimmers like this one. Let me show you. This is sort of a beautiful pink to gold. Yeah, this palette's not available. I'm not going to talk about the amazingness of the colors here, but if you have it, this would be what I would use for Valentine's Day. The next palette, friends, that is hands down a Valentine's palette, And this is the second palette from this brand that I'm talking about, is the Mimosa palette from BH Cosmetics. Friends, I could not talk about BH without talking about this palette. Now, the issue that I have with this palette is that it's not very dark. You can't do dark looks with it, but it allows you to do very funky, bright looks like this. I mean, look at these corals and pinks. Super Valentine's palette. You can even take it a little nude with these nude colors here. Absolutely beautiful palette. If you have it, I would pull it out this time of the year. The next palette, friends, that I want to talk about is another all shimmer palette. But I can't go on without talking about this palette because frankly, this is one of my favorite palettes. And I have a review of this palette with eye looks in this channel. I will tag it in the description box below if you're curious. And that is Gal on Mars palette from Gloss Gods. Now this palette is the new version of a monotone palette. I mean, you're gonna have all kinds of shimmers in this palette that are all a variation of pink. You can do a single shadow look with the black base multichromes that are in this palette. You can even combine some of the colors with the sheer multichromes that are in this palette. You can definitely do multiple types of things with this palette, even if you don't want to combine it with another palette to get mattes. But all the pinks scream Valentine's Day to me. In case I forgot to show you, these are my nails. They have XOs and hearts on them. Very Valentine's appropriate. Now let's go into the next palette. This palette has a little bit of a twist, but I consider it a Valentine's Day palette, and I'll tell you why. And this palette is a Palettopoly from Ace Beaute. Friends, I looked at all of my Ace Beaute palettes to see if there was a palette that I considered Valentine's, and honestly, this is the most Valentine's appropriate to me. Think about it this way. If you eliminate this row, you're gonna get a series of super pinks, beautiful purples. This last maroon row is absolutely beautiful, and then you get a combination of neutral colors, and with a combination of all of these you can go everything from super screamy pink in your face type of a look all the way to very classy soft look to neutral classic potentially all match neutral look all the way to smoky look. Does not look it in one look, but definitely a Valentine's palette. Friends, I called this palette the surprise of the year for 2022 for me because I was not even considering picking this palette up. And then after I picked it up, I realized how versatile it is. And this exact thing that I just talked about shows the versatility of this palette. In one look, you're not gonna realize how Valentine's Day this is, but when you actually start using it, you're like, huh, I can do all kinds of things with this palette. And that's just amazing. I love it when I find palettes that can do that. I know this palette came out a while ago. As I said, I had no intention of picking it up, but let me know if you want me to do some eye looks with this palette. I can definitely do that. Friends, this is the third to last palette, and this is also a second palette from this brand that I'm talking about in this list, but I couldn't talk about this list without talking about this palette because this palette is such a Valentine's appropriate palette, and that is no other than Jackie Aina's collaboration with ABH. Friends, just look at this palette. You have your pinks, your purples, shimmery reds, beautiful shimmer and duochrome coral and gold, and then you have neutrals here. You can create the soft glammy type look. Jackie has done an amazing job curating these colors. It's super appropriate for anything from extremely exotic, flashy, bold, pink, purple type look, all the way to soft glam, all the way to smoky, late night, date night, clubby type of look, which definitely screams Valentine's Day. Friends, we're approaching the end. This is the second to last palette that I'm going to talk about. This is unfortunately an older palette from Colourpop, which is no longer available, but this has been one of my favorite Colourpop palettes, and honestly it's lasted multiple declutters, and I continue to use it and I continue to love it, and you'll see in a minute why it's such an amazing palette. And interestingly enough, with all the dupes that Colourpop has created, it still has not created a dupe of this palette. And this palette is Dream Street, which was a collaboration with Kathleen Lights. Kathleen Lights, being such an amazing creator, has curated an absolutely gorgeous palette with Colourpop. And now I know some of us want very pinky, ready things to call something a Valentine's palette, but frankly, majority of the world is not going to do very exotic eye looks like this. Majority of the world is looking for much more muted down, much more conservative and soft glammy type of look, and this is an ideal palette for that. And on top of that, you have this super beautiful coral, just in case you wanted to add a little bit of pizzazz to your look. This palette, not just for the time it came out, but even for today, has such amazing colors. This color doesn't have a name. I think the name might be on the back, and it's kind of difficult to see. It's hard to see what's what on the back, but this color is sort of a greenish. I don't even know how to describe this color. It's a beautiful color. I have not been able to find a dupe for this color in all the colors that I have, and I have a lot of colors, friends, trust me. Friends, the next palette I'm going to talk about is our last palette, and this has a little bit of a twist to it because I don't think the average person looks at this palette and thinks Valentine's Day, but when I look at this palette, I think I can make a lot of Valentine's appropriate looks with it, and you're going to see in a minute. And this palette is Mary Jane from Adept Cosmetics. Now, I have the original version. I know Adept has released new packaging, and perhaps in that repackaging some of the colors have changed. I don't think that's the case, but I don't know for sure. I've said multiple times in this video that I'm not a one eyeshadow type of person, but if I wanted to do one eyeshadow for Valentine's Day, it would definitely be this pink. If I wanted to do a second eyeshadow for Valentine's Day, it would be this color, friends. I don't know if you can see this. This is a gorgeous color that has a shift from pink to gold. It's one of those, some of you who watch my other videos know that pink to gold shift is one of my favorite shifts in colors, and this definitely delivers that. And then you have these purples again, obviously Valentine. I think you see blue. This is sort of a purple to blue. And then you're gonna get this super iridescent light pink color that you can use in your inner corner. And then you have some of these neutrally colors out here that if you wanted to put on your eyes, you could. Perhaps not a palette that's usable by itself, but if you're combining it with one other palette or a few other matte colors, maybe matte singles, you can get a lot of looks out of this palette for Valentine's Day. And with that, friends, we get to the end of this video. If there is a palette that is your favorite Valentine's Day palette that I forgot to talk about, write it to me in the comments below. Thanks again for being here with me. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. I love you all. Have a fantastic weekend, and until next time, bye.